directly from this. Yeah? Now, these marginal products, of course they're going to depend negatively on labour and positively on the other factor. But because we are assuming constant returns to scale, I showed you this, and all of you that did intermediate macro will remember, because we're assuming constant returns to scale, what really matters is the ratio of the two factors. And so all of these marginal products, marginal product of labour, marginal product of land for each factor, can actually be written as depending only on the ratio of land to labour, or labour to land. So this is equation 3 on the slides, and so you can rewrite this expression. I think I've rewritten it. This is just an example, as depending only on the relative factors, and because those relative factors are going to be depending on the wage ratio, you get the one-to-one relation between the relative price of the goods and the relative price of the factor. Yeah? But remember, I mean, this is just an example, and what the crucial thing is to understand, look at the key diagram and be able to explain to the reader, in this case to an examiner, why it makes sense, why it's upward sloping, why one is to the right of the other, and so on. And the basic idea, as I told you, is firms are trying to maximise profits. They use factors so that the value of the marginal product of each factor is equal to their cost. If you have to use more of one factor than another, so if cloth is labour intensive, then of course a relative increase in the price of labour, so a relative increase in the wage, is going to have a greater impact on the relative price of cloth. Yeah? Ultimately, an increase in wages, all else being the same, if you didn't explain where it came from, if, for example, it was the government saying, well, you'll have to pay more, these workers more, an increase in wages is always bad news for the firm in the sense that it increases its cost. But under competitive markets, that increase in cost is going to be reflected one-to-one into an increase in the price. And what we're saying here is that, as you can see from the basic maths, that increase in the relative price of labour will ultimately have a greater impact on the price of cloth. Yeah? So there's this positive relation between the two. And this is just an example with the Cobb Douglas, so I'll go quickly because it's, there's nothing conceptual here, it's just very, very simple application of what we've been saying. So in this case, remember, cloth is labour intensive, so the share here associated with the labour factor is half rather than 1/3. And of course, food is going to be land intensive. This is 2/3 rather than half. Yeah. So as you can see, the marginal products depend only on the land to labour ratio, and as you saw before, once you know that this choice of land to labour ratio depends crucially on the factors on the price of your factors of production. So this comes from the cost minimisation. And so the expression we had on the previous slide ends up by giving us that one monotonic relation between relative price of factors and relative price of output. Had you gone for not equalising the wages, but equalising the returns on capital, so again, here we're saying factors of production are totally immobile internationally, so you can't, labour cannot move, capital cannot move internationally, but inside the country they can freely move from one industry to the other. So just as we're saying that workers would not be willing to work in a sector unless they're being paid the same as in the other sector, we're saying exactly the same thing about the capitalists. So the owners of capital, they invest because they want to get a return. That return is the rate of profit, also equal to that rental price of capital, the R. And what we're saying is that in a long run, you're going to have an equality between those two rates of profitability. So the rate of return in the land, in this case, in the cloth industry is given by this is also equal to R, and it will have to be equal to the rate of return in the food sector. So had you worked with this one, you would have got exactly the same expression as before. And it makes perfect sense. Can you see this well enough, or shall I make it bigger? Is this big enough? Yeah? Guys? Yes or no? Thank you. Gosh, very difficult to extract a word. So, what we have here is the equilibrium in Ortekis and the self-sufficiency for home. So before trade, we have we're going to have a certain land intensity in each of the industries. Of course, because the factors of production will be paid the same in each of the industries, the W over R will be common to both of them, and this is going to end up by translating into a certain relative price of the two products. So as you can see, there's going to be a one-to-one relationship between the relative price, this little p, of cloth, the relative wage, and factor intensities. And to kind of tell you the basic conclusion here, what we have is that because we're assuming that home is relatively labour abundant, home is going to start with the relative price of cloth, which is lower than abroad. And so foreign, the rest of the world, will want to trade with home, and of course you trade by buying the stuff that is produced more cheaply abroad and selling the stuff that you produce more cheaply yourself. So there's going to be trade, and once the prices of the goods, the final products, cloth and food, are equalised, under certain conditions you would also get the equalisation of the factor prices. But before that, we need to introduce the concept of this concept of land abundance or labour abundance. So it's very, very simple, as I say. It's just about, here we're not looking at relative prices, we're just saying, think of Australia or think of Canada, gigantic countries, as you know. They have very small populations compared to their areas. So both of them are obviously land abundant compared to the UK. Yeah? And so we just say that, in this case, we're assuming that home is labour abundant, so home could be the UK, and foreign could be the New World, Canada, Australia. They're going to be land abundant. So this means that the ratio of, this could be measured in square miles, and this could be measured in millions of people. And what we're saying is that the ratio for Australia of this compared to the UK is much, much greater. Yeah? So what does that mean? Well, don't forget that what we tried to do here is to say, regarding trade theory, we didn't explain where differences in technology came from. We just took them as a given, and from that we derived that countries would naturally have different productivities in all the sectors, and it would make sense to specialise in the goods in which your productivity is relatively the highest. Here we started by ruling out differences in technology. We said, no, it's not because the US and Sweden have different technologies, or the UK and Australia and Canada. They have access to the same technologies, but they're going to have different levels of land or labour abundance. And so, because of that, everything is the same in foreign, but foreign has, so it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing as in the previous diagram. So remember, foreign has asterisks, but now, as you can see, the price of cloth is going to be higher than at home, and likewise for the price of labour. And it's not surprising. Remember, what's going on here is that because foreign is land in abundance, so has a lot of land compared to labour, foreign is going to try to use technologies or techniques that use a lot of T over L. And so as you can see, the T over L here is further to the right than it was for home. And of course, because labour is scarce in Canada and Australia, that is still the case today, not just in the 19th century, because labour is relatively scarce compared to land, it's going to command a higher price. And the price of labour is, of course, W. And so this reflects a higher W over R. This is reflected in a higher W over R. And yet again, because prices reflect costs, and cloth uses relatively more labour than land, then the price of cloth is going to be higher than at home. Is this all right, everyone? So this is, it should be simple, but this is pretty key to understand, because it's the basic mechanism behind this Hexagonal trade theory. Right, so what we're going to see now in figures 7, 8 and 9 is the equilibria in autarky, so before trade, and then the impact of trade. And the impact of trade, of course, starts with people will want to buy the products that are produced at the cheapest possible price. Ultimately, if we assume no transportation costs and so on, if the two countries are producing both cloth and food, they will need to produce them at the same price. So after trade, the international price or the equilibrium price of food is going to be the same in the two countries, and likewise for cloth. But once those prices are equalized and the relative price of cloth is equalized in the two countries, then you will inevitably follow, under all of these assumptions, also have an equalization of the price of the factors. And as I told you, this was a powerful result, because this said you don't need to allow for migration. Trade will take care of this. Trade will guarantee that wages will be equalized. Yeah, of course. As you will see, and this is one of the major contributions of this trade theory compared to Ricardian trade theory, it also shows that there are going to be winners and losers with trade. One factor is going to benefit, the other factor will typically lose. So here it goes for the diagram. So these first, figure 7 and 8 are just equilibria in autarky. So the crucial thing that I would emphasize is that the relative price of cloth at home is lower than it is for foreign. And so obviously it means that home is able to produce cloth at a lower relative price than foreign. So it has a comparative advantage in cloth production. And so there's going to be trade, and I'm going to magnify this. So what we get here is that equalization that I was talking about. So the home line was here, yeah? This comes from figure 7. The foreign line was here. And with trade, these prices, there's going to be one price for each good, and so the relative price of cloth will be the same. So this superscript T is the price of cloth after trade, or with trade. And as you can see, this is the result of all our assumptions. It also means two things. Firms will end up by paying the same wages and rental rental prices to labour and land respectively, and they will inevitably, because we assumed access to the same technologies, be using exactly the same land intensities in the